Your name appears on a document you never signed, filed before you could speak, numbered before you had a thought, and somewhere between the moment you drew your first breath and the moment a clerk pressed a stamp onto a piece of paper, something was decided about you that nobody ever asked your permission for. Not your parents, not their parents, and not the generation before them who watched the system appear out of almost nowhere and accepted it so quietly that within 30 years it had spread to every industrialized nation on Earth simultaneously. That's the part nobody talks about, not the document itself, the speed, the coordination, the silence that followed. Because if the birth certificate was simply a public health tool, a practical solution to infant mortality and demographic record keeping, then what explains why the same system, the same logic, the same foundational architecture appeared in Britain and France and Germany and Australia and Canada and the United States within the same compressed window of time, as if someone had distributed instructions that nobody can find and everybody followed anyway? I didn't set out to question a piece of paper I've carried my entire life, but the deeper I went into where it came from, who designed it, and what it quietly replaced, the more the official explanation began to feel like the smallest part of the story. Go back far enough, and the question of whether you existed was never the government's to answer. For the overwhelming majority of human history, that question belonged to the people around you. Your family knew you were born. Your village knew. Your parish recorded it in a ledger that belonged to the church, not the state, and that you would never be required to carry or produce or surrender to prove your right to exist within the society that had watched you arrive. The Roman Empire administered millions of people without issuing a single one of them a numbered birth document. It tracked households, property, the legal authority of fathers over dependents, the family as a unit of civic life, not the individual body as a separately administered fact. Medieval kingdoms functioned the same way. The community was the record. Belonging was the proof. You were real because the people who knew you said so, and that confirmation moved forward through time, the way all communal knowledge moves, through memory, through relationship, through the living transmission of people who were present. That world did not end because it failed. It ended because something replaced it. And the replacement arrived so smoothly, dressed so completely in the language of care and progress and the welfare of mothers and infants, that the people it was happening to never quite registered that a transaction was taking place. The public case for birth registration was built on genuine suffering. Infant mortality in the 19th century was catastrophic. Diseases moved through populations without the demographic data needed to track or intercept them. Governments genuinely could not see their own populations clearly enough to respond to the crises inside them. A system for recording births and deaths would change that, would save lives, would allow the machinery of a modern caring state to function as it was meant to function. All of that is true, all of that happened. But a system adequate to those purposes would have been a fraction of what was actually constructed. And that gap, between the justification that was offered and the infrastructure that was built, is where the real history of the birth certificate lives. In the United States, the formal push began around 1902, a voluntary compliance framework. States that could demonstrate 90% registration rates would be formally recognized by the Census Bureau. Modest, practical. By 1915, 10 states and the District of Columbia had qualified. By 1933, every state in the Union had joined. 31 years. And in those same 31 years, the Federal Reserve was created. The federal income tax was ratified. The machinery for conscripting millions of men into the First World War was assembled and deployed. Social Security was designed and launched, with the birth certificate as the non-negotiable foundation document on which the entire system rested. These were not parallel developments that happened to coincide. Each one required the previous one. Each one was made possible by the existence of a registered, numbered, individually legible population that had not existed a generation earlier. The birth certificate was not a product of the modern administrative state. It was the condition of its possibility. Remove it and none of the rest assembles. Then you look beyond America, and the coordination problem moves from troubling to something I have no clean word for. Britain, France, Germany, Australia, Canada, all of them moving within the same historical window toward the same architecture, not toward similar systems shaped by similar pressures, arriving at roughly comparable solutions, toward the same system, the individual as the unit, the birth event as the entry point, the numbered document as the anchor of legal identity. Governments that disagreed on almost everything else, that had spent centuries in various configurations of war and rivalry and competing imperial ambition, converged on this single administrative logic within decades of each other, without any formal treaty requiring them to do so, without any public debate naming the convergence as a convergence, without anyone in a position of authority standing up to explain why the most intimate act a human life begins with, the act of being born, was suddenly and permanently the business of the state. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, and patterns that precise do not emerge from coincidence. Here is the concept. The official history of birth registration works very hard not to ask you to think about. In formal legal theory, a human being and a legal person are not the same thing. In ordinary language, they are synonyms. In the architecture of law, they are categorically distinct. A human being is a biological event. You arrive, you breathe, you exist, and none of that requires governmental acknowledgement to be true. A legal person is a construction, something the state assembles and recognizes and assigns obligations to. Corporations are legal persons. They have rights and responsibilities within formal systems without having lungs or a childhood or a name given by someone who loved them. The word itself arrives from the Latin persona, the mask worn by Roman actors, the face presented to the audience, the role inhabited within the performance. And what the birth certificate does, what the architecture of it does when you examine it without the public health framing sitting on top, is attach that mask to a human being at the moment of their entry into the world, before memory, before preference, before any relationship with the system being entered. A document is generated, a number is assigned, and from that point forward, every institution of consequence interacts not with the breathing person exactly, but with the registered entity, the mask that was fitted to your face before you knew you were wearing one. That mask enables specific things, not the things the public health framing describes, the specific structural things that the registered, numbered, individually legible population makes possible that no previous arrangement could have supported at the same scale. Individual taxation. Before registration, the state taxed households, property, trade. After it, the state taxes you. The social security number issued now practically in the delivery room traces directly back to birth registration. That number exists so that the revenue authority knows which specific body to come looking for. Conscription at the scale of the 20th century's wars required verifiable age documentation for millions of men simultaneously. It could not have been managed with church records scattered across private archives in a dozen languages. The birth certificate made mass mobilization administratively possible. Every benefit system, every public institution, every mechanism through which the modern state allocates or withholds anything begins with the same precondition. Before you can receive anything, you must be findable. Registration made an entire civilization findable from its first breath. And then there is the thread that runs underneath all of this, through the obscure corners of legal and financial scholarship, where it has been sitting largely unexamined for a century. When governments borrow against the future, when they issue bonds backed by the projected tax revenue of populations not yet working or voting or even born, they require collateral, something real, something that will generate value reliably across decades. In the early 20th century, precisely as birth registration was being universalized, those same governments were acquiring the capacity to borrow at scales that would have been unimaginable to any treasury in history. The registered citizen, the numbered legal person, the administrable unit of future economic output, trackable from birth, taxable across a lifetime, documentable at death. Whether that citizen functions in some structural sense as the collateral underlying sovereign debt is a question that has been raised in legal journals and then quietly set aside. What has not been set aside is the fact of the parallel. Registration systems and debt infrastructure expanding together across multiple nations in near-perfect coordination, with no formal explanation of the relationship between them ever offered to the populations the arrangement was built around. The silence around that parallel is of a piece with a larger silence that I kept encountering the deeper I went into this. When structures this significant are erected, when the foundational relationship between a person and the society they are born into is rebuilt from the ground up, there is normally a public argument about it, philosophers contesting the terms, lawyers debating the implications, citizens pushing back, or at minimum, asking what is being exchanged. I went looking for that argument. I went looking for the moment in the historical record where the people this was being done to were invited to consider what it meant to hand the state the authority to register a human life as a numbered administrative entry before that life could form a single thought. The debate is not there. The framing stayed practical. Infant mortality, disease tracking, the progressive era's faith in measurement and data, as though the people designing the system either genuinely could not see what else they were designing or had decided that what else they were designing was not something the public needed to be consulted about. What was lost in that silence is not easy to quantify, but it is not nothing. Before registration, your ancestry was not a document. It was a living inheritance. Names carried through households, stories held in the memory of people who were present, the confirmation of who you were and where you came from, moving forward through time inside the relationships of those who knew. You were your family's before you were anyone else's. Your existence was witnessed by people who loved you before it was recorded by people who administered you. The birth certificate did not destroy that, but it overlaid it with something that the modern world has come to treat as more fundamental, more official, more real. A state record, a government entry, a document held not by you or your family, but by the institution that issued it, which can be amended or restricted, or in certain circumstances rendered inaccessible in ways that the memory of the people who knew you cannot be. You were enrolled in this arrangement before you could speak, before you could understand that an arrangement was being made. The document that proves your legal existence, the one required to access almost everything the modern world makes available, was created not for you, but about you. And the question of whether that distinction matters, of whether it has always mattered, of whether the people who designed this system understood precisely what they were building while taking considerable care to describe it as something smaller. That question was never put to the people it concerned most. It was answered for them, quietly, quickly, everywhere at once. And the document in your filing cabinet is the evidence that it worked. What strikes me now, having traced this as far back as the records allow, is how completely the substitution was normalized within a single generation. The children born into the registered world didn't experience it as a substitution. They experienced it as reality. The birth certificate was simply what proved you were you. The number was simply how systems found you. The legal person attached to your body at birth was simply the self you moved through the world as. There was no memory of another arrangement to measure it against, no older sibling who had entered the world without being filed, no grandparent who remembered what it felt like to exist outside the ledger. The forgetting was not forced. It was structural, built into the speed of the transition and the completeness of it. By the time anyone might have thought to ask what had been exchanged, the exchange was 2 generations old, and the people who could have answered were gone. That structural forgetting is, I think, the most underappreciated feature of what was built. A system that produces its own invisibility, that becomes, within decades, so thoroughly embedded in the ordinary texture of life that questioning it feels not dangerous, but simply strange, eccentric, the kind of thing a person does when they have too much time and not enough perspective. We protect the system not because we were told to, but because we absorbed it early enough that it feels like protecting ourselves. And yet the documents exist. The legislative records exist. The timeline exists and it does not lie. 31 years. Every industrialized nation. The same logic, the same architecture, the same silence where the public debate should have been. History does not move that cleanly by accident. Systems do not spread that uniformly without direction. And the fact that the direction was never named, never debated, never subjected to the scrutiny that any restructuring of this magnitude deserved, is not a gap in the record. It is the record. It is what the record is telling you if you are willing to hold it long enough to hear it.